Welcome to People and Profit. I'm Kate Moody. Coming up in this week's show, we're looking at the cost of natural disasters like Hurricanes Harvey and Irma and what businesses and governments can do about the growing risks posed by climate change. The electric revolution is coming to a road near you. We'll tell you about the top trend at the Frankfurt Motor Show and how the auto industry is adapting. And it's struggled to survive years of civil war, but can Ukraine's forgotten wine industry begin to bubble back? First up, communities across the Caribbean and southern United States have been scrambling to deal with the sometimes deadly aftermath of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. Early estimates suggest the storms caused hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage, costs which will be borne by federal and local governments, aid agencies, insurance firms, and the victims themselves. Visiting the Franco-Dutch territory of St. Martin, French President Emmanuel Macron pledged an initial 50 million euros to rebuild the devastated island and said it would serve as a model of how to respond to similar challenges in the future.
I do not want to rebuild St. Martin as it was before. We've seen that there are too many homes that were built precariously, that the infrastructures were too fragile, that the geography of the homes was not adapted to the risks. What has happened in St. Martin is also the consequence of our own incapacity to foresee weather crises. These crises are even more cruel to those who have less. So I want to engage the French government in a profound project with all of our strategies for climate change to prevent this type of crisis.
Now, for more on what can be done to assess, limit and deal with the risks posed by events linked to climate change, I'm joined by Gerald Maradan, co-founder and CEO of EcoAct. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on People and Profit. What's your assessment of the scale of damage that we've seen from Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, particularly in the French territories of the Caribbean?
Yeah, the damages were tremendous. We have discussion with insurers. They said that the insured cost of the two hurricanes were about $70 billion of damages, which is incredible. And we know this is only the direct cost, but if we have a look at the indirect cost, I mean, you can eat about $300 billion. So a big amount.
Now, your firm advises businesses on how to reduce their carbon footprint, but also how to deal with the effects of events that are linked to climate change. What would you say to people who live in these hurricane zones who are at risk of future extreme weather patterns like the ones we've been seeing recently?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion with the corporates. The goal for us is to explain that there is a risk with climate change, so they have to assess the risk and they have to take action plans in order to counter this risk. And this is typical in Texas, for example. You have a lot of state-of-the-art factories in the region, and we have many customers saying, okay, now we have a factory under the water, not only for 3 days, but for several months. So they start thinking that there is an issue with climate change and they have to do something.
Now, these storms have really put a spotlight on the all too real impact of climate change on the ground in people's lives. Do you think they'll perhaps galvanize people, companies, or even governments to take action?
Yeah, it's really when you see the issues that you want to take actions, because, you know, climate change is not really concrete, and for the people, but also for the corporates and public authorities. You know, you have a lot of impact of climate change in South countries most of the time, but more and more you have some extreme event in the US particularly, and now people understand that climate change is now, and they have to do something now.
Now, from hurricanes to heat waves to massive fires, these sort of really tragic and extreme weather events are unfortunately becoming more and more common and more costly. Have you seen governments reacting to that?
Yeah, we cannot say that the Trump administration is reacting, but anyway, we have many governments in the world trying to act, and the best element is the COP21 agreement. You have more regulations in different countries. You have also some action to subsidize new renewables energy, for example, or they try to give some tools to corporates so that they can assess the CO2 emissions. They help citizens to change the windows and everything. So you have a lot of actions in order to foster the fight against climate change.
Now, since the Trump administration announced that the U.S. would be withdrawing from the Paris Accord, we've seen corporations, including Apple, Walmart, Mars, just to name a few, announcing their own initiatives to cut their own carbon footprint and try to switch to a more sustainable, environmentally friendly business model. Do you think that should be the way forward? Should the private sector, rather than the public sector, be taking the lead? Yeah, because most of private sector is dependent on climate change. I mean, there is a direct impact between climate change and economic risk. So this is common sense for these corporates to act. And you know, these big companies, the GAFAs, for example, we know that they account for a lot of CO2 emission in the world. So it's not only the cities or the states, but now it's also the big companies. So they have to act. They have to do a part of the job. Do you see any future for the COP21 deal without the participation of the United States?
Yeah, because many countries are involved in the Paris Agreement. So, as I said before, the United States is quite isolated. We'll see, but we probably within 5 years we'll have a new administration, and the US will come back.
How can being more environmentally friendly make a company more competitive? How do you make the case to prospective clients?
Yeah, more and more we know that there is climate change, and more generally sustainability is a driver of performance. So it's not only the economic performance, but now you have to take into account the risk, and you have to adapt your business model because the consumer demand is different. You have to reduce your CO2 emissions. So, I mean, it's quite easy to discuss with the company and to say, okay, you have to, if you want to increase your performance, you have first to assess, you have to reduce, you have to adapt because you have some risk, and we saw that with the two hurricanes, and you have to do it now.
Gerald Maradan of EcoAct, thank you so much for speaking to us here on People and Profit.
Thank you.
Next up, electric cars are in the spotlight at the Frankfurt Motor Show with new models from the likes of Mercedes-Benz and Jaguar Land Rover. Under growing pressure from regulators and governments, and with growing demand among consumers, mainstream manufacturers are racing to get ahead in a sector already dominated by the likes of Tesla. But Dieselgate is still casting its shadow over the industry, and although Volkswagen is among the companies eyeing an electric future, its chief executive warned it will take time to fully charge.
Everyone's asking when electric cars will be the norm. But it's not just about what is being offered, it's also about electric charging infrastructure. We have started an initiative together with Porsche, Mercedes, BMW and Ford. We have stated that we are committed to building a network of charging stations across European motorways.
So just how much progress has the industry made, and what roadblocks lie ahead? Brian Quinn's been finding out. Brian?
Well, by this point, enough countries and companies have committed to electric vehicles to put the industry well and truly in gear. France and the UK have both announced plans to ban sales of petroleum-powered vehicles by 2040, India by 2030, Norway by 2025. China could prove the tipping point. The country represents fully 1/3 of the global automobile market. It's announced that it, too, is working on a timetable to phase out gas and diesel cars. Major automakers are putting the pedal down to keep up. By 2019, all Volvos will have an electric motor. All 300 models produced by Volkswagen will have their electric versions by 2030. For Mercedes, the target is 2022. But it's American brand Tesla that's blazed the trail, with its flagship Model S sedan and Model X SUV accounting for 45% of all electric vehicle sales in the U.S. for the first half of 2017, handily beating out competitors like the Chevy Bolt and the Nissan Leaf. Tesla plans to sell 500,000 units of its new, more affordable Model 3 sedan in 2018. That alone would represent an enormous leap. Only around 750,000 electric cars of any brand were sold worldwide during 2016. Out of more than 1 billion cars on the road, less than 0.2% are electric. But growth in the industry is strong. Sales of electric vehicles were up 40% in 2016. Car makers estimate that between 9 and 20 million electric cars could be deployed by 2020, with 40 to 70 million on the road by 2025. And while there will no doubt be economic upheaval ahead for both the oil industry and car builders, it seems clear that the future of personal transportation will be measured in kilowatts, not liters.
Brian, thanks so much for those details. Now, outbreaks of violence and trade disputes continue to stunt economic development in Ukraine. Once a top export and tourist attraction, the country's sparkling wine industry has struggled to stay afloat, but is hoping for better times ahead. Shirley Sitbon reports.
This underground winery used to be a popular tourist destination and a leader on the European sparkling wine market, but its figures have dropped since the war broke out. Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists used to fight right outside the site, located in a former mine. The firm has lost its clients in the rebel-controlled regions and in Russia, which used to be its largest market abroad.
Today, our sales figures have fallen. Several cities in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk are no longer under Ukrainian control. We used to sell over 4 million bottles in these regions.
From 19 million bottles produced every year to 12 million. Other problem, the firm has lost its grapes. Since its creation in 1950, it has used grapes from Crimea, Ukraine's historic vineyard region. That's no longer possible.
Before the conflict, we managed to buy the perfect grapes for winemaking in Crimea, because it was a very good harvest with good characteristics in terms of sugar and alcohol content.
Due to the war, Ukraine's economy contracted by 6.6% in 2014 and by 9.8% in 2015. But it has been recovering since. Growth was at 2% last year, and it's expected to rise to 2.8% this year.
That's it for this week. If you have any questions or thoughts about the stories we've been covering, you can get in touch on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at Kate A. Moody. Until next time, thanks for watching.